Returning to Blue Water Gap wasn't a choice. It was a penance. And the mountains never forget who you really are.
What if one sentence from your mouth, just one, could send your own father to prison and never bring him back? Lydia was only 16 when she gave her testimony, believing truth always saves the innocent. But the truth didn't save her father. It buried him behind bars and buried her under a mountain of guilt. Years later, she fled to a forgotten town in Montana, hoping to disappear. But something in the woods had remembered her. Not a person, a presence. One night, just beyond the edge of her porch light, she found a gift. A bundle of wildflowers that only grow deep in the forest, and a footprint the size of her arm. The locals laughed at legends of the Sapphire Range Wildman. But Lydia wasn't laughing, because years ago, she had opened a steel trap in the woods and saved something no one believed existed. And now, it had come back, not to haunt her, to protect her. And when danger finally found her again, that towering creature stepped out of the trees, not with rage, but restraint. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is to not strike back. This is the story of a girl trying to forgive herself, and a beast that never forgot an act of kindness. A story about scars, redemption, and the silent bond between two outcasts walking the line between worlds. And if you're still here, dear viewer, may I ask where you're watching from? What's your name? How far can this story reach, if it's told with care? If this touched something in you, drop a like, subscribe, and help us build a community that believes in second chances, and believes that even Bigfoot deserves a place in our hearts. From wherever you are, we see you, and we send you our warmest welcome. The road twisted like a question no one wanted to answer. Dust rose behind the old blue pickup as it climbed the last stretch into Blue Water Gap, Montana, a two-lane ribbon threading through silence and pine. Late summer light poured gold across the hood. The radio crackled a worn-out country song about home and fathers and regret. Lydia Hartman clicked it off with a flick that was sharper than she meant. She didn't need reminders. She had Ohio license plates and nothing else that stuck to her. One duffel bag, packed more in haste than hope. A resume she wasn't planning to show anyone. And a guilt so heavy it sat with her even in the passenger seat, silent, accusing. At 22, she had no plan, no map, no one waiting. Just a cabin rented by mail and a waitress job she hadn't even applied for yet. She told herself that was freedom. It didn't feel like it. The first glimpse of Blue Water Gap came around a bend. Population sign, 921. Mountains at its back like folded hands. Sapphire Range faint in the distance, as if hiding something. Storefronts sun-bleached and honest. Pickup trucks parked crooked. One blinking light at the only intersection. The Ridge Diner sat squat on Main Street, windows fogged from years of grease and gossip. It wasn't much, but the help wanted sign taped to the glass looked like salvation. Lydia parked down the block. She walked past the hardware store, the post office, a dog tied to a pole that didn't bark at her. Everything here felt paused, like a movie that hadn't been unpaused in years. She stepped inside the diner. The doorbell chimed tiredly. A few heads turned. Mostly older men with weathered caps and the kind of faces that didn't forget a newcomer. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 50s with cropped gray hair and arms like she'd lifted boxes her whole life. She gave Lydia a long, cool glance before jerking her chin toward the sign. "You hear about the job?" Lydia nodded. "Yes, ma'am, if it's still open." "You ever wait tables?" "No, but I learned quick." The woman didn't smile, but she didn't scowl either. "You don't run from spilled coffee." "I've run from worse." That got the faintest lift of an eyebrow. "Try today. Lunch shift's quiet. Apron's on the hook. Name's Carol." Lydia said thank you, meant it. The apron was 2 sizes too big. The coffee pot felt heavier than it should have, but her hands moved with purpose, like she owed something to the act of doing a thing well. She took orders, she refilled mugs, she said yes sir and no ma'am, and didn't mind when they called her sweetheart like she was their granddaughter. But the diner got quiet at 12:37 p.m. when the door opened again. Boots first, dust-stained jeans, a flannel shirt rolled to the elbows, and a face that carried confidence like a loaded gun, holstered but obvious. Roy Calhoun. The air shifted. No one said his name, but the way they looked at him did. He walked straight toward a window booth, one everyone else had avoided all morning, and Lydia was standing right next to it. She didn't know the rules yet. She'd bent down to tie her bootlace and sat on the edge of the bench without thinking. Just for a second, he stopped, looked down at her like she was something out of place in a museum. "Around here," he said, voice slow and sharp as a knife through fruit, "we respect seats that don't belong to us." Lydia looked up, startled, stood. "Didn't mean any offense." "You did just the same." She stepped aside. Didn't realize a booth could belong to someone. Roy didn't answer, just slid into the booth like a king reclaiming a throne. Carol didn't intervene. No one did. Lydia went back to the counter, her cheeks hot, her spine stiff. But she didn't cry. Later that night, after her shift, she drove the truck up a gravel road to the cabin she'd rented. Just a shed with plumbing, really. She left the porch light off, sat on the bed, exhaled. By morning, the truck wouldn't start. She walked it to town. At the garage, a man with oil on his hands squinted at the undercarriage and said, "Fuel line's been cut. Real clean job." Lydia stared. "Like someone used a knife?" He nodded, gave a shrug, like it wasn't the first time he'd seen something like that. But he didn't say more. She didn't ask. No money to fix it yet. So she walked. Dusty road, back trail that skirted the edge of the forest. Evening air turning sharp. The trees were tall and quiet, the kind of quiet that hummed. She remembered being a child and hiding in woods behind her grandmother's house. Back then, the dark didn't frighten her. It thrilled her. Now it felt like something watching. She paused once, turned. Nothing, just branches shifting in wind. But her skin crawled. A sense, not a sound, that she wasn't alone. Far behind her, deep in the trees, something moved. A shape, broad, upright, motionless, gone in the blink. She walked faster. Near the cabin, her foot slipped by a puddle. She reached out to steady herself, and that's when she saw it. A footprint. Not a boot, not a bear. It was shaped like a human foot, but massive. 20 inches, maybe more. The mud pressed deep like the ground itself remembered the weight. Lydia knelt, touched the edge, cold, still moist. "That's not bear," she whispered. She didn't sleep well that night. The next morning at the diner, 2 old men sat near the counter, talking low. "Back in the 60s, a ranger swore he saw it," one said. "Big as a grizzly. Smelled like wet bark and death." Yeah, the other laughed. "And my cousin married a mermaid." But a third voice, soft, slow, cut in. Deacon Mills, an older man with hands like tree bark and a voice like dusk. He said, "The woods remember kindness and cruelty." No one answered him, but Lydia heard it. She carried the words all the way back to her porch that night. Stood outside the cabin, staring into the trees. "If you're out there," she said quietly, "please don't hurt me." Far beyond the reach of her porch light, something shifted. Not closer. Back. A shape, a presence, receding. She didn't see it, not fully, but she felt it. A pause, a breath, a retreat. And for the first time in weeks, the silence felt like a kind of mercy. She never told anyone about that summer. Not even her mother. Not even herself. In the quiet ways that mattered. 3 years back, Sapphire Range had smelled like pine and campfire ash, and the kind of wildness you can't describe to someone who's never stepped off pavement. Lydia was 19, a volunteer with the Forest Conservancy. The type of girl who filled out forms with tidy handwriting and brought granola in Ziploc bags, too eager to know what it felt like to be useful. They were there to clear old trail markers, document overgrowth, check on tagged wildlife. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave her a reason to breathe in a place where nothing expected anything of her. The crew had split that afternoon. She'd wandered a little off route, chasing the rustle of a marmot through brush, boots sinking into soft moss. That's when she heard it, a low, pained sound. Not quite human, not quite animal. Just wrong. She followed the noise, one cautious step at a time. Around a boulder, past a patch of ferns, and there it was, massive, curled into itself, hair matted with blood and earth. A trap clamped around its leg like a cruel joke someone forgot to laugh at. Its eyes locked on hers. She didn't scream. Maybe it was shock, maybe instinct, or maybe it was the way those eyes didn't threaten. They pleaded. Her hands shook, but she stepped closer, whispered something soft. Maybe an apology, maybe nothing at all. The creature trembled. She unzipped her pack, found a scarf, a half sandwich, a multi-tool. She remembered kneeling, working the latch. The teeth of the steel trap released with a snap that made her heart flinch. Blood soaked into the scarf as she tied it around the leg. It whimpered, the way a horse might, or a man too proud to cry. Then she left, ran back. Told the rangers she'd found a bear, maybe, not sure, wounded, needed help. By the time they got there, it was gone. Only the bent trap remained, and a patch of moss pressed down like someone had kneeled there for a while. She didn't speak of it again, but some things remember. Now, years later, that same face, older, more hollowed, walked past Pine and Stone each morning to Ridge Diner, and far above, from the safety of shadows, something watched. Its name wasn't a name like hers, not English, not human, but it remembered. The girl who bled for him. It had taken time for him to be sure. The human face had changed, grown sharper, eyes heavier, but the scent, the shape, the rhythm of her walk, it was her. Each night she walked home alone through that long, crooked road by the forest's edge. Her breath turned white in the cooling air. Her steps quickened in the dusk, but she didn't know. Not yet. He followed from a distance, never too close, not to scare her, just enough to guard. One morning she opened the cabin door to a surprise. On the wooden step, laid carefully like an offering, was a bundle of wildflowers, freshly picked. Purple aster, fireweed, fleabane, arranged, not perfectly but intentionally. No note, no footprints, just the flowers. She stood there for a long moment, the air still, then knelt, touched the stems, looked toward the trees. A tremor passed through her, but it wasn't fear. Not quite. It was the kind of feeling that lives somewhere between being seen and being remembered. But Roy didn't understand that kind of feeling. He saw the flowers while passing by in his truck, windows down, music up, sunglasses perched like he'd been born cool. And he didn't see kindness. He saw competition. Later that night, the cabin walls shook. Boots stomped up the porch. Fists slammed the door. Shouted slurs about girls from out of state, about strays thinking they belong. A bottle shattered near the step. Lydia stayed silent, back pressed against the wall. When the noise stopped, she exhaled. But something inside her had bent a little. Not broken, just leaned further into its own quiet. The next week she tried applying for a second job, just something small. Stocking at the grocery, helping at the antique shop. Each time a polite smile and a no. One man, older kind eyes, said gently, "It's not personal, miss, but you crossed to Calhoun. This town's small." So she stopped asking. At the county office, trying to change the lease to her name, she saw it. A battered folder in the corner of a cardboard box marked for shredding. The name Hartman, written in faint pencil. Her hand moved without thinking, slid it out, flipped it open. Inside, transcripts, legal forms, notes in blue ink, a younger version of her handwriting. It hit her like a storm she thought had passed. She had testified. She remembered that. But the details, the phrasing, the emphasis, words that once felt like truth now read like betrayal. A line, she'd said. Repeated, maybe too carefully. A detail no one had asked her to include. And it had mattered. It had pushed the verdict. She had helped bury her father. Not with a shovel, with a sentence. The folder trembled in her grip. Her lungs refused rhythm. She walked out of the office without the lease, without a plan. Just walked. That night, she sat on the floor of the cabin. The folder open beside her. Her hands in her hair. Her body still, but her mind sprinting through every moment she couldn't undo. Outside, the wind shifted. Leaves rustled in a way that didn't belong to wind alone. From the tree line, something approached. Slow, careful, large. But it didn't come close. Instead, just at the edge of firelight, it placed something on the ground. Then disappeared. Lydia didn't see the movement, only the aftermath, a carved piece of wood. She stepped outside barefoot, dirt cold beneath her. Picked it up. It was smoothed by hand, or something like hand. On the front, carved deep with claw or knife, was a crude image. A metal trap, wide open. She stared. It wasn't just a gift, it was a message, he remembered. She hadn't imagined that day in the forest. He'd never forgotten it. And maybe, just maybe, that meant she wasn't the only one trying to carry something she didn't ask for. Inside, the lamp flickered. Her breath returned. And in the dark, something far older than guilt waited for her to understand that redemption doesn't knock. Sometimes it just leaves flowers, or a piece of wood, or a space between trees where it chooses not to step, and waits. Under the quiet of early fall, the mornings came cold enough to sting, but soft enough to forget the worst of summer. Leaves edged into gold. Smoke curled up from distant chimneys. Everything in Blue Water Gap moved a little slower now, like the whole town was leaning into the coming hush. But the girl at the edge of the woods had begun to feel something wake. Lydia stood on her porch, her coffee forgotten in one hand, her eyes fixed on the wooden carving she'd left on the railing the night before. It was still there, but moved slightly. Just an inch. Not enough to call wind. A message had been carved deeper in the back during the night. Not words, just a symbol. A trap springing open. She ran her thumb over the grooves. Her breath caught. The image matched a memory buried too long. 3 summers back, deep in the Sapphire Range, a rusted jaw of iron snapped around flesh, the smell of blood and pine and something not human staring back at her with pleading eyes. And now here, in this nowhere town with a broken-down truck and more ghosts than furniture, a creature had found her again. Not for revenge, not for fear, but because it remembered. She started leaving bits of food at the tree line. Small things, bread, jerky, apples when she could spare them. And every night, just after the crickets started their chorus, the shadows stirred, never too close, always just beyond the lantern's reach. She would sit on the porch wrapped in a worn flannel blanket, arms crossed tight against the chill, watching the edge of dark where something breathed slowly. The shape never entered the light. It waited. She never tried to rush it. That felt like breaking a promise she didn't remember making. 20 feet, maybe 25. That was the boundary, and it felt like respect. Some nights she'd speak, just soft things, like she was talking to herself. But she wasn't, and she knew it. "Are you the same one?" she'd whisper. "From the trap. I didn't think you lived." No reply, just silence that listened. Then came the night with the flashlight beams slicing through the trees like spears. Roy's truck rumbled too close. A new row of floodlights bolted to the roof. Overkill. He circled near her road, slower than before, engine idle low and crawling. Looking, hoping maybe, to catch someone leaving her porch. Lydia stood inside with the lights off, heart steady but clenched. She didn't move. But outside, the forest moved away. She saw it, just barely. A taller shadow slipping into the darker parts of the dark. Roy's tires spun gravel as he pulled away. She didn't sleep much that night. The next day, she found a note on her cabin door from the land office. Effective immediately, her rent was increasing by 60%. No warning. No reason except adjusted maintenance costs. She held the paper like it might burn her. No way to afford that. Not unless she started taking double shifts at the diner, and even then, it wouldn't cover food. Gas. Life. She folded it without reading the rest. Walked to the edge of the woods with nothing but her palms open. Said nothing. That night he didn't come. Not at first. The food sat untouched. She waited. Hours. Then finally, from the trees, a slow rustle. He stepped forward. Not out of the dark, but closer than before. Just into the edge of the glow. She could see more of him now. Taller than any man she'd met. Broader. Covered in thick, rough fur like moss-draped bark. And in one massive hand, he held the same wooden carving from before. He tapped it once against the dirt, then looked up at her. Not like an animal, like something waiting to be understood. She looked at the carving again. The trap, the open shape, the message beneath the silence. "You remember," she said, not as a question, but as awe. His shoulders rose and fell, not like breathing, more like memory, like weight returning to a body. She stepped back, just a little, but kept her gaze steady. She didn't cry, but something inside her softened in a way that didn't feel like weakness. It felt like trust. She nodded once, slowly, then turned and went inside. Left the door cracked. It was an invitation. It was acknowledgement. 2 nights later, something changed again. She'd been reading on the porch, light dim, the stars mostly hidden behind a veil of low cloud. The woods were quieter than usual. No wind, no steps, just an ache in the silence. Then, behind Strider, she hadn't said the name out loud, but it had settled into her anyway. On a ridge slightly higher than the clearing, another figure, not moving, not approaching, but watching. Larger, broader, more upright. It didn't blink, didn't flinch, just stood there, half veiled by the trees, as if judging not her, but the space between them. Lydia's chest tightened. Not from fear, from understanding. He wasn't alone. There was more than him. A family, a clan, something more than legend, something alive and unspoken. She blinked once. The figure was gone. Strider didn't react. Or maybe he already knew. The night air felt heavier after that. She didn't tell anyone. Not Carol at the diner. Not Deacon, who watched her sometimes with that knowing softness. Not even herself. Not in the way that formed thoughts into solid things. But she noticed more. The way Roy had stopped coming by. The way the woods felt less like a place and more like a presence. One night, sitting on the porch with her arms around her knees, Lydia whispered, "I didn't know you were still alive. I didn't know you remembered." There was no reply. But Strider raised one hand and knocked gently, twice, against the trunk of a pine. The sound echoed low, like a drum pressed against the belly of the earth. And it felt like an answer. Back inside, Lydia didn't sleep right away. She lay on her narrow bed, listening to the forest breathe, to the weight of her own guilt shifting into something else. Not gone, just not alone anymore. Something ancient had seen her, remembered her, and chosen not to leave. And for the first time in years, Lydia began to believe that maybe not everything broken has to stay that way. Maybe some things come back, and maybe some things never left. Under the kind of night that doesn't breathe, the kind that presses against your skin and makes even the stars feel heavy, Lydia walked out of the diner with a paper bag tucked against her ribs and a knot growing behind her eyes. Her shift had run late. Carol had nodded toward the bag without words. Some leftover stew, cornbread, a slice of peach pie that didn't sell. Acts of kindness here came quiet. The town had long since emptied. Even the light in the sheriff's window had blinked out. Lydia took the alley behind the church, shortcut through the gravel lot where the pavement gave up. Her boots crunched soft on loose stone. She zipped her coat higher. Somewhere far off, an owl called once, and the trees seemed to lean closer, She didn't hear the first beer can hit the ground, but she felt the silence shift. 3 figures stepped out from behind the chapel. Shadows pulled long in the yellow spill of the parking lot light. Roy Calhoun at the front, a smirk caught between teeth and spit. 2 boys behind him, barely out of high school but hungry for permission. "Well, look who's still pretending she belongs," Roy said, hands loose at his sides like he didn't care. But his eyes burned sharp. Lydia froze, hand still gripping the dinner bag. "I'm just going home," she said, not begging, just stating a fact, like she was reminding the night that she wasn't asking for much. "See," Roy said, stepping closer. "That's your problem, thinking you got a home here." She turned to walk, but one of the boys grabbed her shoulder. Hard. Roy grabbed a fistful of her hair. Not enough to yank, just enough to humiliate. "Maybe a busted nose will help you learn the rules." Then everything held its breath. The wind stopped. The insects stopped. Even the buzzing street lights seemed to die a second too soon. And from the line of pines at the edge of the lot, something moved. Fast. Massive. Too quiet for its size. It hit the asphalt like thunder in soft shoes. The boys didn't see it at first, only Lydia's eyes widening. Then it roared. Not loud, not long, but low. Deep enough that the metal trash bin rattled and the hair on every neck stood up like grass in a storm. The 2 boys ran. One tripped over the curb and scraped his knees bloody on the way down. Neither looked back. Roy stood frozen. It was him and the thing now. 8.5 feet of muscle and fur and scar. One hand the size of a shovel, raised just enough that it hovered an inch from Roy's throat. Lydia's voice cracked the silence. "No, don't!" Strider turned. Not all the way, just enough to hear her. Then slowly, deliberately, he dropped his hand. Shifted sideways until he stood between Lydia and Roy. Like a wall, like a decision. Roy's mouth opened, but no sound came. His eyes drifted downward. Saw the left leg, the scar, long, ragged, twisted bone beneath fur that hadn't grown back right. And the memory crashed through him. Himself, smaller, following his grandfather into the woods. The laughter, the steel trap they'd baited. The thing they'd never spoken of again. Strider looked at him. Not with hatred, not with forgiveness, just with the burden of remembering. Lydia didn't move. She stood behind the creature like she was part of its shadow now. The paper bag lay forgotten on the ground, contents spilled but untouched. From down the block, voices rose. Flashlights, the red blink of a tail light backing up. Deacon Mills at the front, lantern in hand. He didn't draw a weapon. He just stepped forward until the beam of his light caught the edges of fur and the outline of a girl who didn't flinch. "Stand down," someone muttered from behind him. "You shoot that thing, you hit the girl too," Deacon said, without looking back. More townspeople gathered. The sheriff, late and out of breath. A few folks with raised hands and frightened eyes. No one fired. Roy dropped to his knees. It wasn't theatrical. It was collapse. He started mumbling, then louder. "I did it. The trap. That was me. Me and Sam, we put it out back of Ridge Hollow. It wasn't for her. I didn't know she'd be there. I just—" His voice cracked. "I didn't think it'd survive." He looked at Lydia, then at the people behind the light. The cabin, the truck, the threats, all me. I didn't want her here. She wasn't supposed to belong here. No one spoke. Strider turned, looked at Lydia, held her gaze for a long breath, then stepped back. One pace, another, then into the dark again, without a sound. His prints remained in the church parking lot, massive, clear, like a signature. Lydia stood still, hands shaking, breath shallow but steady. Deacon lowered his light. The sheriff holstered his weapon. People stepped back like the air had started moving again. Nobody said thank you, but something in the silence had changed. That night, in her cabin, Lydia didn't sleep. She sat with a blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders, staring at the marks left in the dirt just beyond her porch. She could still feel where Strider had stood in front of her, like a shield, like something older than law. She whispered, "You didn't have to, But you did. Outside, the wind moved through the trees again, and this time it didn't sound like fear. It sounded like something choosing to stay. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the cold had teeth now. It clung to the grass in a thin silver crust each morning, made the porch steps slick and the breath visible. Lydia wrapped her scarf tighter as she stepped out, eyes drawn, automatically, almost spiritually, to the woods. The tree line stood still, silent, but she felt it again, that weight of presence, not threatening, just there, watching without needing to be seen. Across town, in a ranch house at the edge of a flat, frost-bitten pasture, a dinner table sat quiet except for the clink of utensils against ceramic and the low creak of old wood. Sam Calhoun ate without looking at his grandson. Roy stared down at his plate, hands motionless. There was nothing left to chew, and still he didn't move. The confession at the church lot hadn't just stripped his name in town. It had carved something raw open between them. And Sam hated raw. "You sure it was him?" Sam asked finally, eyes still locked on his fork. Roy nodded without lifting his head. "Scar on the leg. Same one." The old man's knife froze mid-cut. His eyes narrowed like something feral was waking behind them. "Well," he muttered, pushing back his chair. "Should have finished it years ago." He left the table, down the hallway. A closet opened. Behind a stack of old hunting jackets, a rifle sat wrapped in burlap. Sam unwrapped it like something sacred. When the sun dropped, he vanished into the woods, somewhere on the eastern slope of the Sapphire Range, far from where Lydia had walked the night before. Strider crouched behind a veil of pine, watching the others. There were more of them now. One, taller, stood by the creek, drinking. Another huddled under an outcropping of stone, shielding a smaller one from wind. He watched them without joining. He always watched from the outside, like a soldier unsure of peace. The first shot cracked through the stillness. Not close, but not far enough. Strider spun. The second shot tore through bark just inches from where he stood. The third found flesh. His body bucked. A sound punched from his chest, primal and pained. Blood bloomed warm against his side. He staggered down the slope, away from the tree line, away from the others. Sam Calhoun stood at the ridge, panting. The rifle lowered, not in mercy, but in the pause of reload. He waited, but the creature never re-emerged. He fired one more time into the dark, then cursed low, turned back. The blood trail vanished at the edge of a steep ravine. He didn't follow. He didn't need to. "It'll bleed out," he told himself. "Let the forest do the rest." 3 miles away, in a hollow thick with bramble and moss, Strider dragged himself beneath the roots of a fallen tree. His breath came shallow, in and out, slower. The cold crawled in. His vision swam. He lay still for 2 nights. Only the forest knew where. And then a sound. Boots on rock. Not many, just one. Deacon Mills moved carefully, hands ungloved, lantern swinging low. He knew these woods the way old men know the rhythm of heartache, intimately, patiently. He'd come to check an old trap line he hadn't touched in years. But something pulled him off trail. He found the blood first, then a broken pine bough, heavy with matted fur. And finally, deep beneath that tangled root, eyes staring back at him, eyes that didn't beg, just waited. He dropped the lantern, stepped back, then he saw the leg, and he remembered the church lot, the girl, the shadow, the way it had stopped. He didn't run. Instead, he whispered, like talking to a dog caught in barbed wire. "You helped her." He knelt, not too close, just enough. "I think it's my turn now." The sled came from an old shed, the tarp he used to cover firewood. The rope, frayed, but strong enough. He couldn't do it alone, so he knocked on Lydia's door. She opened, hair sleep-messed, eyes wide with knowing before he even spoke. "He's down," Deacon said. "Your friend, in bad shape." She didn't grab her coat. she just moved. They walked 2 miles through snow crust and shadow. Found him where the roots curled like fingers over his body. They said nothing on the walk. Words would have made it too real, too fragile. It took them hours to move him. Dead weight, but still warm. The wound wept through fur and onto the tarp. Deacon muttered prayers he hadn't believed in for years. They brought him to the back of Deacon's property, an old horse stall, long since abandoned. Lydia lit 3 oil lamps, one for light, one for warmth, one for hope. Deacon made a call, not to a hospital, not to a vet in town, but to a woman he'd known long ago. A veterinarian who once traded surgery for silence, who now lived just outside Missoula and owed Deacon something deep and private. She arrived by morning, gray hair in a braid, hands steady as stone. She asked no questions. "What am I looking at?" she asked, more statement than inquiry. "Something hurt," Lydia said simply. The woman nodded. "Then I'll help." They stitched in silence, cleaned, bandaged. Strider never woke, but his breath stayed. Over the next 2 days, Deacon started whispering to the town. Not the details, not the whole truth, just, "There's a creature, an animal, hurt, took a bullet. Not a bear, not dangerous, but not right to let it die." Some scoffed, others asked what kind. Deacon said, "Something we owe." They donated what they could. Blankets, gauze, antibiotics. Quiet cash slipped into old coffee cans. No one asked who exactly it was for. Lydia watched over him, hour by hour. Some nights she read to him, a book about the history of Montana forests. Not because he could understand the words, but because her voice felt like something that still worked. One night she rested her hand on his shoulder. He didn't stir. She said, "You saved me. Now it's my turn." The wind answered, lifting the corner of the tarp. Somewhere deep in the trees, something large walked the perimeter and didn't cross it. It was the second chance she hadn't dared ask for. A redemption stitched not with apology, but with action. And none of them, not Deacon, not the woman with the steady hands, not Lydia, ever called him a monster. Because the ones who hunted him sat at the head of the dinner table, and the ones who saved him had once been broken too. The letter came on a Tuesday, curled at the corners, smudged with travel, and months too late. Lydia didn't notice it at first. Buried under ads and utility notices, it sat like something misplaced by time. She brought the whole stack inside, tossed it on the counter, and went back to boiling water for tea. The barn behind Deacon's property still glowed faintly in the distance. Warm light from kerosene lamps flickering against the frost-painted window panes. Inside, he was still alive, still breathing. When she finally opened the envelope, her hands paused before she even read the handwriting. It was her mother's, pressed hard against the page like the words themselves were trying not to break apart. She read it standing up. The first letter was dated 8 months ago. It began the way her mother never used to write, without coldness, without precision. Like she'd been trying to say something for years and only now found the language. "Your father was cleared." That line held her like a punch she hadn't seen coming. New evidence, a review panel, a late confession from a man already locked away for something else. There'd been mistakes, the lawyer said. Bad ones. Her father had been exonerated before he died, but barely. His name was cleared, but his lungs had collapsed the month before the ruling. The state offered a formal apology. Her mother sold the house, paid off the debts, set aside what was left for Lydia, $45,000, all of it hers, to start again. She sat down slowly, the kettle screaming behind her, forgotten. There was another letter, dated later. This one felt different. Her mother wrote about her own failing heart, about the way silence eats at a person when they can't look their child in the eye. She spoke of mercy, of legacy, of hope. "If you could show mercy to a creature in pain, I know there's still hope for this family's name. Please don't disappear, Lydia. Live, not just survive." Lydia read that line 5 times, like it would open a door if she stared long enough. She looked out the window toward the barn. He was still there. The creature. Her ghost. Her second chance. She folded both letters slowly, laid them on the table beside her. In the barn, Strider lay wrapped in thick wool blankets, stitched up but not yet mended. He hadn't opened his eyes in 3 days, but his breath came strong now, deeper than before. The vet had come again and left behind a jar of medicine and a note with dosage instructions. She didn't ask questions, didn't want answers. Lydia sat beside him on a stool with chipped paint and dirt-crusted legs. She didn't speak. Not at first, but her fingers reached out, hesitant, then rested gently on the mat of fur just above the shoulder. "You didn't give up," she whispered. The lantern cracked, casting his form in soft shadows. She leaned forward, her voice quieter now. "Seems like I'm not the only one who got judged wrong, huh?" He didn't stir. But she swore. She saw a twitch in the corner of his jaw, a flex of something beneath sleep. The next morning, Roy showed up. He looked thinner, less dangerous, less sure of himself. He stood at the edge of Deacon's porch with a knit cap in his hands, twisting it like he didn't know what to do with silence. "I need to talk," he said. Deacon didn't nod, didn't smile, just stepped aside. Inside, the cabin smelled like old tobacco and pine oil. Roy sat at the table without being asked. "I know where the rest of it is," he said. "The traps, the pelts, everything Sam's been hiding out there. I know the trail." Deacon raised his eyebrows but said nothing. "I'll take the sheriff, show him myself. I don't care what happens to me." The room sat still for a while. Then Deacon poured him a cup of coffee. "That's a start," he said. By noon, Roy stood beside 2 deputies and a county wildlife officer in the backwoods north of Ridge Hollow. Snow had melted just enough to expose rusted teeth under old leaves. One by one, they found the cache. Steel traps, illegal hunting gear, dried blood on cracked pelts, photos in faded envelopes of animals no one should have been proud to pose with. The look on the sheriff's face said it all. Later, when they brought Sam in, he didn't fight. Just spat on the ground and muttered something about weak spines and spoiled towns. Lydia didn't go to the arraignment. She didn't have to. The world had already started shifting. That night in the barn, Strider stirred. She was half asleep when it happened, head resting against the post, blanket wrapped around her knees. A sound, barely more than a breath, pulled her eyes open. He was looking at her, not fully upright, not moving, but awake, aware. She didn't flinch. His gaze didn't roam, didn't dart around the room. It found her and stayed. Like he recognized her not as the girl from the trap or the woman from the cabin porch, but both, one and the same. Deacon entered quietly, stood back in the shadows, watching. Strider's eyes didn't break from Lydia's. In that quiet, something passed between them. Not language, not promise, just knowing. By morning he slept again, but lighter this time, not like a body trying to leave itself. Lydia stepped outside into the cold gray air, sky the color of pewter, snow crust crunching under her boots. She stood still. The wind caught her hair. Somewhere down the ridge, a hawk screamed low across the treetops. "I'm done running," she said softly, voice breaking only once. "From this town, from my past, from myself." It wasn't for anyone to hear, but it didn't have to be. Sometimes the truth arrives late, but exactly on the day your heart needs one more reason to stay. And for the first time since she crossed into Blue Water Gap, Lydia Hartman wasn't counting the miles she'd come to disappear. She was counting the breaths it would take to stay. By the time the snow receded and the creek behind Deacon's barn ran clear again, something in Blue Water Gap had shifted. Not loud, not dramatic. Just enough that people started saying good morning a little softer, tipping hats a little lower, leaving porch lights on longer into dusk as if the town had grown aware it was being watched, but not judged. Watched like a place still deciding what kind of story it wanted to be. At the church on Main, pews filled for something other than Sunday. Folding chairs lined the back wall, and Deacon Mills stood at the front, hands in his pockets, eyes not on any one person but on everyone at once. "We've got land out past Coyote Hollow," he said. "About 200 acres no one's logged since the 60s. Nothing grows right there. No hunting clubs pay for it. Just space. But some of you've seen what walks through it. He let the silence stretch, not heavy, just honest. I say we keep it that way. No traps, no rifles, no gas-powered toys. Just leave it be. A few murmurs, a scoff from near the back. But no one shouted. Roy stood beside the door. Clean-shaven, sleeves rolled. Still twitchy in the shoulders, like the guilt hadn't quite worked its way out of his bones yet. When he stepped forward, the air felt thinner. I was raised to believe power meant getting your way, he said, voice raw but clear. But I learned something these past months. Some things are bigger than that. Some things deserve peace, and hell, maybe so do we. Someone clapped, then another. A vote passed, not unanimous but strong. Outside, the sun cracked through a line of clouds just long enough to catch the stained glass and scatter color across the sidewalk. Back at the ranch house, Sam Calhoun sat at the defense table and refused to look anyone in the eye. The courtroom wasn't full. It didn't need to be. Evidence didn't sweat. It stacked. Photos, testimonies, records of violations that went back too many years. He was sentenced. Fines, time, loss of license. They read it all aloud, like numbers could explain how a man could harden past the point of knowing what wildness meant. When he passed Lydia in the hallway, escorted by 2 deputies, he didn't spit or curse. He just stared, eyes like rusted nails, and then looked away. That night, Deacon knocked on her door. He held a manila folder and a tin box shaped like a loaf of bread. "You ever own land?" he asked. She blinked. "No." "Good time to start." He handed her papers, deed, transfer, parcel map. "1 acre, he said. "Borders the woods. Got a shed no one uses. My folks used to store hay there. Now it's just spiders and memory." She tried to speak, but the lump in her throat got there first. He added gently, "Price is $1. That's not a discount. It's a trust." She signed with hands that shook. In the following weeks, the shed became something else. A hammer here, a bucket of paint there. Carol donated 2 booths from the diner when they remodeled. Roy brought cedar planks and a coat rack he made by hand. The vet from Missoula mailed a wood-burned sign. Lydia carved the name herself, hung it over the front window. Pine and Lantern Cafe. No Wi-Fi, no TV, just books, old records, quiet corners. The coffee came hot and slow. The conversations came even slower. It drew people who didn't know where else to go. A man who'd lost his wife. A boy who didn't talk much. A woman who'd grown up in the Gap but hadn't walked Main Street in 10 years. They came because the light stayed on, and because sometimes she was out front in the evenings, just sitting, watching the woods. And sometimes, something watched back. Strider didn't return alone. He came with spring breath in his chest and a straighter gait. But more than that, one night, just as the cafe lights dimmed and Lydia sat beneath the porch lamp, a shape moved behind him. Smaller, tentative, half hiding behind Strider's leg. The child wasn't a child the way humans measured it, but it was younger. The fur lighter, the shoulders less certain. It mimicked Strider's movements like echo. Low to the ground, then rising slightly, then sitting back just out of the light. Strider didn't correct it, just let it watch. Lydia didn't wave, didn't move. She only smiled, soft and full. Inside, someone asked her why she kept the porch light on even when the cafe closed. She said, so the right ones can still find their way. It wasn't long before the town noticed the outside world sniffing around. Tourists, camera crews, hunters who called themselves cryptid enthusiasts. They came with long lenses and louder questions. Someone snapped a photo of a footprint in the mud by Old Birch Creek. Another swore they heard howling that didn't belong to any known species. Whispers filled message boards and radio calls. Then they showed up. 3 SUVs with out-of-state plates. Men in canvas jackets. A woman with a drone. They came with gear, with permits to camp on public land, and the kind of expressions that said they believed discovery meant ownership. Roy stopped them at the hardware store. Told them the land past the ridge was protected. Community rule. Nothing formal. Just understood. They laughed. One called it superstition. By nightfall, they'd pitched tents near the edge of the restricted zone. But before morning, they packed up. No one knew why. Some said they heard something in the dark. Massive, slow, breathing too close to the nylon tent walls. One woman claimed she'd seen a figure across the clearing, watching with eyes that reflected gold. None of them stayed a second night. The next day, a handwritten note appeared on the Pine and Lantern bulletin board. "We won't be back. We didn't belong." No one took it down. That evening, as twilight folded itself into blue, Lydia stepped outside and found Strider again. But this time, he sat closer than ever before, just 15 feet from the porch. His back was to her, facing the woods, watching, guarding. The young one was there too, pressed low beside him, curious but obedient. She wrapped her scarf tighter, sat on the steps. "They chose you today," she said, voice quiet. "Not fear, not guns. You." Strider didn't turn, but he nodded once, a slow, almost imperceptible bow of the head, as if to say, "I know," as if to say, "So did you." Summer came back like a soft apology, warm but not scorching, kind in the way it lit the hills, touched the leaves, and lingered longer each evening as if reluctant to leave. The wind lost its bite. The lanterns outside the cafe no longer fought the chill. They just glowed. And for the first time in a long, long while, Lydia Hartman found herself in a season that didn't ask her to survive. It let her live. Business at Pine and Lantern Cafe never boomed, and that was exactly how she wanted it. She poured coffee slow. She let the silence sit where it needed to. There were no clocks on the walls, only the gentle ticking of an old wooden one behind the counter, one that had belonged to Deacon's mother. It was never perfectly accurate, and no one asked it to be. Folks came not for time, but to forget it. She kept a shelf near the back for books with broken spines and stories that healed. She kept a box near the register where people could drop memories anonymously. Handwritten slips, drawings, confessions folded like tiny truths. She never read them unless someone asked her to. Most didn't. They just needed a place to leave something behind. Her days weren't busy. They were full. And some evenings, when the light dipped low and the wind stirred the grass just right, Strider appeared again at the edge of the woods. But he wasn't alone anymore. That first time she saw the child standing beside him, smaller, lighter in fur, movements uncertain. Lydia didn't react. She didn't wave. She didn't blink hard or squint to confirm. She just placed a cup of tea on the porch rail and left it there. The child stepped forward. Not far, just enough to mimic Strider's old stance. Knees bent, body still, eyes focused. It was trying to understand this ritual between its elder and the woman in the wooden house with the warm lights. Strider didn't correct it. He let the young one learn by watching, and Lydia let it happen without demand. The child lay down, chest against the earth, mirroring a gesture it hadn't been taught out loud. It knew, the same way Strider had known. There were things in this world passed down not by language, but by presence, by choosing to stay when it would have been easier to leave. One morning, an older woman visited the cafe alone. A new face. Her hands shook when she held the mug, but her voice didn't. "I lost my son to heroin," she said without preamble. "It tore our family in half. Some days I think I did it, that I pushed him there." Lydia didn't offer sympathy. She offered space. Then she told a story. Not about Bigfoot, not about the forest, just about a girl who believed she'd killed her father with the truth. And how years later, the truth came walking back, not in a courtroom, not in a headline, but in the quiet between trees. And how sometimes what breaks you finds its way home not to haunt, but to heal. The woman wept, not for the first time, but maybe for the first time without shame. She whispered, "I thought I was the only one who'd ever been saved by something I couldn't explain." Lydia touched her hand. "You weren't." Later that week, Lydia found something in the clearing past her back fence. A rusted steel trap, the kind her nightmares still remembered. It had been bent backward, snapped clean at the joint, the teeth twisted like fingers pulled in prayer. It sat on open ground, not buried, not hidden, displayed, a statement. She stood there staring for a long time. Then she knelt, ran her hand along the cold metal, and smiled. That evening she lit every lantern at the cafe, even the ones not needed. Strider came again, child in tow. Lydia didn't speak. She just opened the door, stepped outside, and sat with her knees to her chest, eyes toward the tree line. The child lay down again, this time without hesitation. It pressed close to the dirt, not in submission, but understanding. It blinked slowly, like it was learning not just safety, but rhythm. Strider stood behind, still as stone, yet breathing like something that had let go of a weight after carrying it too long. They stayed like that a while, cafe, forest, in between. Lydia broke the silence, voice soft as dusk. "We made it, didn't we?" Strider shifted slightly. Not toward her, but toward the child, then toward the woods, then back to her. The look in his eyes was no longer haunted, no longer wild. It was whole. He was no longer a hunted thing, no longer just a scar given shape. He was a father now, a watcher, a keeper of distance, and now, of legacy. The child glanced up at him, then back at Lydia, as if measuring the space between trust and instinct. 15 feet, the same distance Strider had once held. But this time it didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a bridge. The lights behind her flickered, steady and golden. In that moment, she saw her life the way only someone who'd come through hell can see it. Not as survival, but as testimony. Not as a debt paid, but as a promise kept, she whispered, barely audible. "Thank you." The child blinked. Strider lowered his head once, then turned. The woods welcomed them back without a sound. Lydia remained on the steps, not waiting, not hoping, just remembering. The air shifted, and behind it came peace. There are debts in this world that aren't owed in dollars or blood. They're paid in choices. In the second time, you choose mercy instead of fear. In the way you meet silence not with suspicion, but stillness. A girl once arrived with nothing but guilt and a name she was ready to abandon. And she left behind something better. She left kindness like breadcrumbs, and something found her, something that remembered, and chose to stay. The porch lights glowed long after she'd gone to bed. Not because she forgot, but because some doors don't close. They hum, and some stories don't end. They just wait in the woods for the right person to return. There are stories we carry not in our pockets, but in the quiet folds of our spirit. Tales that do not shout, but hum softly when the world is still enough to hear. They are not made of glory or grandeur or the kinds of triumph that fit neatly into headlines. They are born from the quieter things. Forgiveness, patience, quiet bravery. The decision to stay instead of run. The courage to care even when trust has been shattered. These are not the stories that change the world all at once, but they are the ones that hold it together when it's falling apart. Because sometimes, what saves us doesn't come with answers. It comes with presence. A presence that asks for nothing, gives everything, and leaves behind a warmth that lingers long after the moment is gone. In this world full of noise and judgment, sometimes the most radical thing we can do is to listen, to notice, and to love without condition. That love may take the shape of a shelter, a silence shared between two strangers, or a gesture so small no one else would notice, except the one who needs it most. This story has always been about that kind of love, the kind that isn't earned or expected, but offered freely, the kind that restores what shame tried to erase. And perhaps that is the most extraordinary part of it all. Not the mysteries in the forest, not the miracles, but the simple truth that kindness still matters, and it always will. So as you go back into your own world, wherever that may be, whether you're watching from a quiet town, a busy city, or somewhere deep in the woods, remember this: no act of gentleness is ever wasted. No small moment of compassion goes unseen. You never know who you might be saving just by showing up with an open heart. And now, dear friends and kindred spirits, we'd love to hear from you. What part of this journey spoke to you most? What did it stir in your heart? Leave us a comment below. We read every single one, and your stories mean the world to this growing circle of warmth and wonder. If this tale touched something in you, please consider subscribing to our channel. It helps us keep telling these human stories wrapped in mystery, love, and hope. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that there's still light out there, share this story with them. Sometimes all it takes is one voice, one story, to bring someone home. From our forest to yours. Thank you for being here. We'll see you again, just beyond the tree line.